it got me obsessed investing in real estate. I'm a freshman in college at that point. This guy told me, I'll teach you everything you want to know, but you need to wire me 10 grand. That's more money than I'd ever seen. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my friends. I sold my car. I wired the stranger all my money.
Welcome to the Masters of Business podcast with Daniel Beer.
What a treat, man, to have you right here today. Leo Pareja, the CEO of publicly traded, NASDAQ traded, eXp Realty, largest brokerage in the nation. And now
throw in on the planet.
On the planet, there you go. Largest brokerage on the planet. Also now in several, to that point where I was headed was in multiple locations in terms of just international expansion. Impressive business background in that you were the founder of a real estate technology company, co-founder, called Remine, that you then went on to sell. You were the founder and ran a really successful hard money lending business, Washington Capital Partners, but that was all after being the number one Keller Williams agent on the planet. So a deep history in real estate sales, and then that went off in real estate related industries, now actually leading the biggest real estate company on the planet. So, Leo, welcome to the podcast. And on this podcast, we talk to people across all different industries, finding those threads that as business owners, as entrepreneurs, whether you're growing a law practice, a plumbing company, you have a real estate team, whatever it might be, or a large brokerage like the one you're running, there's universal business principles that are so much fun for me to extract and just find cross industries. So first off, welcome. And just take us really quickly through, the short version of just your journey of how you got here, aside from what I already mentioned. But along the way, there must have been a number of challenges that you faced, and you picked very specific things to get into, all of them quite different, even though still with a little bit of real estate roots. And so take us through that journey, just if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I started in real estate much younger than most people, which, by the way, I've found to be a commonality of top performers in that space. So I got licensed at 19 years old. I started while I was a college student. Really fell in love with. I actually went to school during the tech bubble. So I was a student in the year 2000 to do graphic design and web design in tech, which ironically I went full circle 20 years later on. But that tech bubble blew up while I was a freshman in college. And literally the thing I was studying to do was disappearing in front of my eyes, right? So companies like WorldCom and AOL just disappeared while I was taking my gen ed classes to go into that field. I read a book by Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I feel is like a very foundational book for lots of folks who come from a very traditional kind of work hard, go to school, get a job environment. That was the first book I ever read about leverage of people, time, and money, which I'm sure we'll talk about because I think it's kind of universal. That has nothing to do with real estate. It's just scaling and growing businesses. And it got me obsessed. I couldn't get my hands on enough information on investing in real estate. And I found a gentleman who my dad introduced me to because he used the script on my dad, said, hey, do you want to invest in real estate passively, which is a great script to raise capital. And my dad said, no, but my son's obsessed. I went to lunch with this guy. I offered to work for free for him so he could teach me stuff. He turned me down and he referred me to a guy out in Colorado who's a coach. This guy told me, I'll teach you everything you want to know, but you need to wire me 10 grand. And I'm a freshman in college at that point. That's more money than I'd ever seen. But I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my friends. I sold my car and wired the stranger all my money. And my car was something I had saved dearly for scooping ice cream at Baskin Robbins for.
No kidding.
And I wired the stranger all my money. And we get into an intense 1-year mentoring relationship. And it's really like learning the psychology of a sale, like understanding that we are human beings and we make emotional decisions, then justify them logically, understanding the why, getting to a yes or getting to a no as fast as possible because that leads to more yeses. Just kind of like really understanding, like, objection handling and qualifying the appointment prior to. 8 months in, because by the way, I still don't want to be a realtor, Dan. I want to be an investor. He says you have to get your license because it's going to give you access to the MLS, and you're going to be able to if you're going to be an investor, you might as well have a license. So I get my license. I end up hanging it with the original guy who turned me down because he had opened up a KW franchise in my market. And it was like a Tuesday, and I was pretty hungover because I had a party the night before, and my landlord said I had to move because it was a little louder than he wanted. And so I was looking for rentals at the office on the MLS, and the guy came up behind me and goes, "Why don't you just buy a house?" I was like, "I'm a child. I can't buy a house." And he's like, "You don't know that." So I went and talked to the loan officer down the hall that he told me to. And she said, "Hey, you have really good credit. You paid off a car. This is crazy." I was like, "Long story, but yes, that's a true story." And so I did a FHA non-occupant co-borrower loan where my dad co-signed my loan, but I put up all the down payment, which was 3%. And I got the 3% from my commission. So I bought my first house a year later, so I was 20. And it was a 4-bedroom. I rented out each bedroom for $500 and house hacked my house. And this was like May. It was about summer of my sophomore year. And that was my first transaction I ever did. And I wrote a little script and I said, "Let me talk to your parents about your housing needs for next year." And I pitched all my fraternity brothers and any sorority girl who would take my call. And I sold 11 homes that summer.
Wow.
Made 60 grand and went and blew it on a 3 Series BMW.
Of course.
But by my senior year of college as a full-time student, I did $306,000 in GCI. And
so that's gross commission income, right? So gross revenue in the real estate space, GCI.
As a full-time student.
Very cool. But just for context, guys, and I love context. It's on Leo's hat.
It's my favorite word in the English language. That's why I wear the hat.
Well, most people miss that. I mean, they're just right. And so, for context, that is probably outperforming the average full-time realtor who's not in college. Oh gosh, I'm going to say about 10x, about roughly, if you're looking at averages across the country. So, okay.
So I graduate. I think I'm special at that point, right? I'm a 22-year-old kid bringing like 23, 24, bringing in $500,000. Once I no longer have to go to class, I bought 14 rental properties. I thought I was really special. And then 2007 happened. And I realized I was just a creature of the market, right? And at that point, I had left KW. I started an independent, and I spent all my cash building an independent. Perfect timing. So I had a very rough awakening to leverage and how it works. And I gave all the properties back, gave all the BMWs back. Lots of crying, lots of boogers. And, oh, by the way, I also got sued by KW for violating a non-compete, non-solicitation agreement. And so I basically had to start over as the market collapsed. And I had a moment where it was like I had 90 days of cash left and I was going to have to file bankruptcy. And I actually spent it visiting the top 10 producers in the industry that will take my call. And I would just get on a plane and fly there and ask a ton of questions. And I had a massive aha, which is none of them are smarter than me. None of them have like some magical power that makes them special. And I realized that a lot of them picked a couple things, got really good at it, and just did it consistently. Right. So I then asked a lot of people. They'd seen this movie before, and they told me they had. It was in the early 90s with SNL. They said, follow the debt. And I started calling banks and started asking about foreclosures. And I think 1 year I did 7 deals because it was like the worst year ever. And then the second year, I figured out how to do foreclosures. I did 99 transactions by myself. And then it was like 280, 300, 400. Then by 2010, I was the number 1 agent in the world. And I sold 603 homes in 12 months. And back then, teams weren't as big as like yours is now, right? People weren't doing those numbers. When I did that in 2010, I was number 1 at KW, but like number 5 overall on the Wall Street Journal.
Wow. And, just to extract here a little nugget that we could easily just gloss over. You said none of these folks that you had been calling had any kind of superpower. Then you also mentioned that they had gotten really consistent at a few things. So I think it could be that they did have a superpower. The superpower was consistency. It doesn't sound like that big of an aha moment for anybody listening, but because it's not it's not a secret superpower.
Right.
It's one that
No,
everyone can talk about and understand. But if you actually look under the hood at what people are actually doing day to day, even really smart, strong people that have a drive and how many are actually consistent?
exactly. Right. But I thought they were special versus consistent, and it was an awesome aha because I was like, I can do that.
That is special, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I can
Yep.
do that. So 2010, 2012, I'm in the top 5 for like 4 or 5 years. Um, I again saw a super interesting moment, and like NAREP, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, has been like a super important part of my career because I founded their DC chapter 2011, got very involved in policy, and as the financial crisis was unfolding, I actually got this super unique vantage point because Gary Acosta, the CEO, would call me and be like, "Hey, can you go to this meeting tomorrow? They just sent me an invite last minute. I can't physically get to DC in time." And I said, "Sure," and I'll take notes. And then I called him from when I got to the address he gave me, and I was like, "Yo, these are the Eisenhower offices to the White House. Like, is this where I'm supposed to be?" And I was like in the room when it happened, when like Comptroller of the Currency and head of HFA and FHA and VA were all in the room deciding the new financial system. And that's where Dodd-Frank was born, CFPB was formed, QRM was formed. And one, it's a really, really important example in my life of just saying yes, even when you don't feel ready, and being willing to be very uncomfortable. But what I got out of all those conversations is they were about to change the rules in a meaningful way. And again, there were necessary rule changes like the ability to repay, no more no income, no asset loans, and all that things. But anytime that rules are made, especially by regulators, which is kind of full circle to like what we're seeing in the industry right now, is there's unintended consequences. And one of the unintended consequences was you could no longer borrow money from banks in an asset-based lending format. So you always had to, like, if you were to borrow money to flip houses right now, your tax return has to support the cash flow. Like, that's just a rule now that we take for granted, but that wasn't the case until the financial crisis. Like if you bought a building that's appraisers for 4 million and you were only borrowing 2 million and it didn't matter what the income was, you could borrow it because it was an asset-based loan. So FDIC insured banks could no longer do that. And so that's where I saw a moment in time where I was like, hey, maybe I should get into hard money lending. It looks like there's going to be a need. And sometimes in life, right place, right time. We connected the dots, launched the business. It scaled to become a very large business, originate billions and billions of dollars. Didn't have a loan origination system that on the market. Like that wasn't a very scaled institutional sized business. It was very regional, mom and pop. And at that point, had the opportunity to build my own technology, needed public record data. The public record data plugged into my system, created Remind almost by accident because I saw another need once we went there, and ended up raising $48 million institutional capital, had 300 employees, acquired a couple companies, flew 200 days a year for 4 years. It's like I went to the moon 7 times from the distance, exited both businesses, moved to South Florida. And I got a cold call from a mutual friend of ours named Glenn Sanford, and he convinced me to come join EXP.
So you become the CEO of EXP Realty. Again, it's the biggest brokerage on the planet. And without getting into the weeds of why that is, when you look at all the agent counts, it's just understanding it's one brokerage instead of a franchised system, where really in a traditional model, the franchises are each their own brokerage on a legal basis. They operate independently. They have their own independent world, and they're really just franchises with maybe 100, 200, or even 50 agents per brokerage. So you, meanwhile, are, right as of the time of this recording, bordering just south, I think, of 90,000 agents that are at EXP Realty. You get made CEO. So let's go here real quick. Jump into, what are you currently focused on?
So in our industry right now, we're especially because your audience is non-real estate folks as well, we're experiencing another one of those massive shifts right now where there was massive antitrust litigation, and there is a settlement that was implemented weeks ago that is a pretty significant shift as to like the operating standard that everyone was used to. And I became CEO in my interpretation based on this moment in time where there was going to be massive change. Um, and so my obsession was just getting the company operationally perfect and excellent for this moment. Um, and making sure that we prepare our agents with all the tools and, tools meaning forums, education, resources in order to maneuver this shift. Because in my opinion, there's going to be a separation of the folks who can adapt and embrace the change. And I think that's universally applicable. And actually, if you see my career, that's actually been a theme of moments that I've been able to say, agree or disagree with the change. These are the new rules of engagement, and how do I embrace them and leverage them and grow? So I would say right now, my entire focus in getting us through this moment, empowering our agents to thrive in this moment that is chaotic. I'm calling it the messy middle. Before this podcast, I just finished doing an interview with another magazine. And again, my singular kind of focus is North Star of the consumer, right? At the end of the day, the game of business is creating a service that doesn't have a lot of friction, right? And gives an excellent consumer experience, because consumers ultimately decide with their dollars.
Yeah. So while you're as CEO of eXp Realty, I know, and I've had the privilege of not only creating a great business relationship, but a friendship with you, and I know you have 100 new opportunities that are presented to you on a daily basis. So I love asking people like you that are in a position to, have to where so much comes across your desk. How do you know if you're looking at an opportunity worth pursuing? And we've seen you do it. We've seen you take eXp Realty, whether it be left or right or set right, just go after an opportunity. At the same time, for every opportunity that you take on, just a wild guess, but I have to think you're turning down 200 of them or 500 of them. So how do you discern an opportunity versus the proverbial squirrel, shiny object, distraction?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that's like,
what framework could you share with us?
Yeah, because and by the way, I feel like that's the game of life. That's the game of entrepreneurship. Like, and this experience, because so now I've ran a 1-person business, a 50-person business, a 300-person business, and this is now on the employee side a 3,000-person business, let alone supporting nearly 90,000 agents. And I think, like, if you're starting out, and I don't care if you're a plumber, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever entrepreneurial vertical you're in, I actually tell people when I speak, I say, listen, really understand what your time is worth, and whatever part of the journey you're in, that's okay if it's low, right? And the mathematical equation is 2,080 hours a year is what the Department of Labor says is a full-time job. Divide by what you made on your 1099 or tax return last year, and that'll give you a number, right? Whether it's $25, $50, or $3,000. And so as you're going through your personal entrepreneurship journey, where you wear all the hats, you then start to create leverage. And then, like, in what you do, your example is your time is very valuable, so you need to discern how you spend it. And even if somebody offered you, Dan, $2,500 an hour, I would argue that you should spend that time pouring into your people, because the ROI on your people is higher than that. And so my personal time almost translates that exact same way. Like, I actually spend half my days doing this, spending time with who I think are my key constituents, and making sure that you guys feel supported and are actually supported. And for me, it's a feedback loop. It's listening to what you guys are experiencing in the field. And you've seen me do it very quickly. Like, I agree, let me go execute on that. And then you've also been with me where you're like, hey, I think this is really cool. And I said, I agree with you, but it doesn't scale in a meaningful way, and it doesn't impact enough of our people, so I'm not going to pay attention, right? And this has been the I guess the most difficult part, is also adjusting to the fact that, like, I can no longer read my email. Like, Andrea does that and flags it. And now I'm even like, just respond or text me and say, this one's important, right? Like, I lost control of Facebook Messenger months ago. right? Like that, I still have text and Instagram DM is the two forms of communication I can still keep track of. But like I get asked to speak 2 times a day now. And I'm very clear that I say no to most things. Unless it's like super impactful for the industry. Like I went to DC and back in a single day yesterday and addressed a lot of industry CEOs on things that I'm quite opinionated about and sometimes controversial, because I'm thinking through what is best for the consumer and the industry and not putting profits over people. So there's moments where I do that, but outside, like you've seen it, I don't actually go hobnob at industry events and hang out.
Right.
I literally just go to agent events or our events, right? Like that's because that's where I spend my time. And when I'm deciding on products and stuff, this is a formula that I've always prescribed to from like even in being an investor in startups.
Okay.
And it's making sure you understand what the total addressable market opportunity is. So in investor speak, that's the TAM. And is the TAM big enough? And again, this is how I think you should look at the world, from your vantage point, and say, okay, this makes sense. I'm going to go spend time and energy on this opportunity, because the ROI on the amount of people I can do business with is there. Too many businesses are like, hey, I'm going to go do X, and then the TAM's not big enough, so your CAC, customer acquisition cost, is it worth it, right? So to me, it's TAM, TAM, total addressable market, then CAC, customer acquisition cost, and then the lifetime value, LTV, of that service or product is the total math problem, right? So I'll give you an example. Like you live in San Diego, if you spend $250 to $500 per customer acquisition cost for a potential seller lead,